Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the last Occupational and Environmental Health Seminar for the academic year. Today we have Jeff Clark, who's the Senior Occupational Hygienist at WorkSafeBC. He's a certified industrial hygienist, a registered occupational hygienist, a registered professional biologist, and he holds a master's degree in biology from UBC. He's conducted many investigations into a variety of occupational hygiene issues, including bioaerosols, asbestos, silica, and confined spaces, and that's what he's going to talk to us about today. Welcome, Jeff.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sarah said I could turn myself on now. So we will proceed on that vein. We're here today to talk about confined spaces in agriculture. And for me, with the industrial hygiene experience and confined space experience I have, this is a very, very different place to work. WorkSafeBC only got or was able to enforce the occupational health and safety regulation on agriculture starting in 2005. So this is a relatively new group to us, and agricultural venues, if you will, tend to range from the relatively straightforward, basic kind of thing, all the way up to very highly sophisticated operations. And the agriculture employers overall tend to be a very independent lot who like to do things on their own. And some of this stuff can cause some difficulties when you're talking about programs and regulations and various things. So we've been working with this group for a while now. And one of the things that we did as a consequence of the coroner's inquest into the mushroom farm deaths in 2008, after all that happened, of course, there's 3 people died in the mushroom farm and 2 were permanently injured. And after the coroner's inquest, the jury recommended, one thing they recommended was that WorkSafeBC put together a training program, information program for agriculture employers on confined spaces. And sort of the words confined space, center of excellence, and agriculture were bandied about, and I'll sort of carry on in that vein just to show you what we do. So there's a lot of people who are involved in this. FARSHA, the Farm and Ranch Safety and Health Association, who deals with agricultural employers, we're heavily involved in this, and we'll be doing a lot of the training, and we're instrumental in getting us on the sites. And another strange name that a few of you in the room may have heard, Neil McManus, was also involved. He wrote one of the books on confined spaces, and he was involved in going out and doing a lot of the field work to identify some of these weird confined spaces that we found in agriculture. So what I'm going to show you today is some of the material we put together for the farmers, including some of the educational material. So what you're getting is sort of the same kind of educational material that they'll get, and we've tried to make it pretty straightforward and talked about the hazards of the spaces and not going into a lot of details on, okay, if you're going to go in, you have to have this program and that program. What we primarily want to do with this is get them to recognize what the spaces are, make an inventory of them, put signs on them so that people know, and tell their workers about it so they don't go in accidentally. So if everybody's informed, then only 3 things can happen, right? If you go into a confined space and there's an accident or you're not supposed to go in, you either do it because you're ignorant, you do it because the procedures that are in place are not good enough, or you do it on purpose. And any one of those 3 can get you into trouble. So what we want to do is make people aware, so at least they're not ignorant. We'll take care of that first step. So very briefly, what is a confined space to get everybody on side? This is a good example of a confined space. And according to the Occupational Health and Safety Regulation, there are 4 things that have to be met in order for a space to be considered a confined space under Part 9. And Part 9 is a fairly prescriptive, very rigorous regulation. It can be difficult to comply with, and a lot of employers are really eager to get their spaces out of Part 9, and there actually are ways to do that. I mean, and we are all for it at the board because we want people to make these spaces safer, and you can do that and get them out of Part 9. So first of all, it has to be enclosed. That's not much wiggle room there, so to speak. A worker's got to be able to get inside, so it's got to be big enough for them to get in there. And some of these spaces in agriculture, particularly the mobile equipment, as you'll see, some of it's difficult to get in, and some are really small, and some of them are bigger. Not intended for human occupancy, which means no lights, no ventilation, no electricity, no washrooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I was doing my consulting work, I found a school district did a rather creative thing in trying to get a crawl space out of Part 9. I went down in this crawl space and we were crawling around, and I came upon a desk and a chair and a gooseneck lamp that was hooked up to a... So they had light and they had a place to sit, but I said, no. That does not meet the definition. And the last thing, which is the one that people have the most flexibility on in terms of making spaces safer, is difficult to evacuate the space or get people in and out or to rescue them. So for example, if you have a space with a small door and you make that door big enough to get a couple of people with a stretcher in and out, that takes that piece out of the confined space definition, and that space would be taken out of Part 9. Now that doesn't mean the hazards have just disappeared. That doesn't happen, no. It means that there are other sections of the regulation that still apply. And you'll see an example in the case of a manure pond. So you don't ignore the hazards, but there are some aspects of Part 9 that you can do without. So, types of confined spaces in agriculture. There are typical things that we would find in agriculture, like silos and grain bins and bunkers and milk tanks and manure ponds and things like that. And you also find in the other column there, and I'm told I can use the mouse like this, you have things like valve chambers and lift stations and septic tanks and well pits. These are things that are found even in a lot of municipalities, so they're very common confined spaces. And then, of course, we have boilers. You can get those in greenhouses. Again, sumps and manholes are all over the place. And crawl spaces are all over the place. So a lot of these people already are sort of aware of. And then you have some ones that are a little stranger. Pump sheds, like the one where those workers died in the mushroom farm. We'll talk about that one. All sorts of different types of mobile equipment, like manure spreaders and feed mixers. Refrigeration equipment in berry farms and in vegetable farms, and grain drying equipment. Cardboard compactors, you know, all the cardboard that goes in and out of these berry farms, it just doesn't disappear. They compact it down. And some of these compactors are big enough to get into. Load levelers are, I haven't quite figured out what they are, but apparently they're these, in the loading bays, they have these things that raise or lower the load, and they're kind of tight, but I guess some people could get into them if they really wanted to. Auger and conveyor tunnels. An auger is like a screw conveyor. It's a screw that sits in a long tunnel, and it transports solids like grain and various things like that, and a regular conveyor. These things are in tunnels. So you actually have to get into the tunnel to work on the equipment, and some of these things can go quite far. And scale pits. Scale pits are, they weigh the cows and stuff like that in ranches on a scale, and underneath is a pit, because you got cows sitting around for a long time. There are things that tend to accumulate, right? And then rather than cows getting higher, they drop it down below so that everybody's on the same level. So those are scale pits. Quickly, hazards in confined spaces before we get into pictures. Everybody be on the same page. You've got atmospheric hazards, various toxic gases that can show up, low oxygen, and of course the explosive type of things. Biological agents, which are something that we're looking at a little bit more closely now. We've actually had some claims from workers who were injured by biological agents in confined spaces. And of course the physical ones, the entrapment, engulfment, drowning, and of course machinery. People have been seriously injured and died for all of these things. Electric shock, hot and cold temperatures, and noise. So you've got your physical, your biological, and your atmospheric things. So this sort of just summarizes everything. But there are other things that might not be in there, for example, radiation in some circumstances, but not mostly. So let's take a look at some confined spaces. Take a look at some pictures. Now what we've done is we went out to these sites. We went out to dairy farms, and we went out to vegetable farms, and we went to ranches. We subdivided, and you'll see how this works out later, all of our classification units for agriculture, which is where we classify things like feedlots and ranches and so on and so forth, into 8 subcategories. And each one of these 8 categories, we went out to the farms, and we looked at the confined spaces, and we took a whole bunch of pictures. Now we've got a data bank of confined space pictures in agriculture with numbers around 3,000. And ultimately, a lot of this stuff will end up on the web and for download, so you'll be able to get these photographs and download them and use them. And these are some of the photographs. So this thing here is a feed bin. It's either on a ranch or a chicken farm or something. And you can see that people can get in these things. They can get up a ladder here, and there are hatchways on the top, and they have a slanted or sloped cone-shaped bottom, so that if the thing was empty and the worker sort of slipped down, they'd be sitting down there. It'd be pretty hard to get them out. So these are confined spaces, and what we're doing with the educational piece is we'll show a picture like this to the employer and to the worker, and then we do that. So this tells them the hazards that they can run into in these spaces. So for example, if the feed is wet, which it usually is not, but if it is, then you could get carbon dioxide from biological activity, low oxygen, and of course you've got your engulfment if the grain slips. Some of these are pretty big. These ones are small. Or entrapment, as I mentioned, in the bottom of the bin, and bacteria and mold. So those are the hazards. So all these photographs are arranged so that we show them a picture, and then we show them the hazards. And ultimately, we want to get to a point where they can guess, which is always fun. So for example, grain bins. This is a different kind of bin, flat bottom, and it's got a big door on the side. If that door is big enough and that grain bin is empty, it would not be under Part 9. But if it was filled up above the door and workers were going in from the top, and this looks like it might be either some sort of access, and there's another access over here where the mouse thing is, then, and they could squeeze in there. Some of these people are kind of tiny to get in there. Then it would be under Part 9 as a confined space. So some of these spaces, they can change depending upon the condition that they're in. So again, like feed bins, same sort of thing, that if the grain gets wet, you can have biological activity and low oxygen, and of course there's engulfment by grain and mechanical equipment, because these things have augers. These, I'm going to back up here. These things are augers that carry the grain away, just a screw conveyor. And occasionally, the real hazard in these grain bins is occasionally these things get clogged. And they used to, they probably still do, would send a worker down in a bosun's chair. So it's a chair, or they put them in a harness and down they go. And what they used to do is they used to just sort of dance on the grain and free up the thing, right? And there were lots of instances where that didn't quite work so well, and they got buried in the stuff and died. Not very pleasant. So anyhow, but there are easier ways to do that. I'll show you how engineering solution to that problem so they don't have to go in. Milk tanks in dairy farms. These are pretty big tanks. They can be 30 feet or 10 meters if you're in metric, and 6 feet 2 meters in diameter. And this one, for example, goes, this is just the front of the tank. It goes back all the way through into this back area here. And it has a hatch on the top right about there in the front, and a ladder to get up to it. So people can get into these things. So, but milk tanks, unlike some of the other ones, you don't worry about as much about an atmospheric hazard, because this thing is either full of milk or it's not. And if there's any kind of biological activity going on in there, people aren't going to be happy with the end product, right? I mean, you don't want to take your milk container and open it up and it smells like whatever. So those things are fairly clean, but there's still mechanical parts in there that they use to keep things moving and agitate. And if they have to clean them out, they use some fairly caustic cleaning chemicals in some of these things. They're stainless steel, so you got to be careful of that. So we just moving along. Here's a water tank, and there's lots of these around. And of course, same sort of thing. You can there's the top. How they get up there, I don't know. You can step on the pipe, crawl up here. How many sections of the regulation are they breaking so far? And then crawl down in this thing. And so they can do that. So water tanks, again, if the tank has been sitting stagnant for a while, you can get sediment sitting in the bottom. You can get biological activity, but very similar to the milk tanks, you get cleaning chemicals. And of course, people can drown in here. And that did happen in wine tanks in the Okanagan in 2002, where the worker fell in and drowned. Now, look at these. All sorts of other kinds of tanks. Additive tanks. So they can have fertilizer in them. They can have nutrients. They can have water. They can have, Lord only knows what else they can have in them. And you can see ladders going up to the top of these things. So they're all confined spaces. And depending, again, on what is in the tanks, you could have anything from toxic gases, low oxygen. They can drown in them, bacteria, mold, and cleaning chemicals. So as we train people, as we give this information to farmers and they move through this stuff, a lot of this stuff is starting to sound, okay, yeah, this is pretty consistent. And hopefully some of it will stick. Open top water tanks. Some of these are filled with water, like rainwater, but you can still get sediment in the bottom that if you empty the tank and walk around, you can stir up all sorts of nasties. And in the mushroom composting business, they recirculate some of this stuff that they get off of the fermenting straw, and they call it brown water, and that's even worse than clean water, obviously. So you can have all sorts of nasty things going on in there. Toxic gases, hydrogen sulfide, methane, ammonia, low oxygen, drowning. So you see some consistency here. There's all sorts of ways to die. It's pretty consistent. And the mechanical equipment, they have pumps and agitators in these things that you've got to turn off before you put people in them. People don't like getting swirled around in that. That's not very good for workers. Well pits. Most of these farms are off the water grid, so they're not hooked up to municipal water. They have their own wells. And these well pits are with all the equipment in them. This one's got a little stairway going down, which may or may not help in terms of rescue. But a lot of them are subfloor, and they are confined spaces. And again, if things are going on down there in terms of fermentation, things are wet, you can get low oxygen. Drowning if flooded, although that's, again, a person's choice, whether you want to go down the stairs into a swimming pool that sits in a bunch of electrical kind of equipment, then you'd sort of taking your life in your hands. So electrocution is a problem there as well. Manure ponds, this is always a good one. As this is, people have died in these things. They're down in Virginia, I think, in 07, the whole family died. Dad went in and he was moving an agitator around or fixing an agitator or a pump, and then he never came out, so they sent a worker went in. The worker never came out, and so Mom and the girls went in, and all of them died. I didn't find them until later. So these manure ponds, when they're full, they're sort of not really confined spaces, are they? Because no one can get in them. But when they're empty, if these things can be like 30 meters by 30 meters by 2 meters deep. So, and if it's a straight side going down, then when they're empty, you climb down in that thing, and you're wandering around in there, and you're going to get exposed to all sorts of stuff. Again, similar vein, hydrogen sulfide and ammonia and methane being the main three that you can run into. Now, you can take these manure ponds out of Part 9 simply by building an easy access ramp. So instead of having a steep side going down, you build a ramp. And that means the access is in and out, no problem. It comes out of Part 9, but that doesn't mean that all of these hazards suddenly vanish. So you can't, you tell people, well, I take it out of Part 9, I don't have to do anything. Well, you go in there, the one thing you're going to do is die, so you might want to do something to relieve that possibility. So you still need the same toxic gas meter, you still need to measure oxygen concentration, you have to be aware of these other things. Pump lift stations, they collect water and they pump water from someplace to someplace else, and workers have to get into them to repair the equipment. And so here's the hatchway, and sophisticated tool used to open that. And then down they go, down a ladder into this area where all of the electrical equipment and everything is, with water in the bottom, and they do whatever they're going to do. So again, similar sorts of confined space hazards, and including electrocution in the case of this one. So if you're going to, again, put together a work procedure for somebody to go in there and work safely, you really have to make sure that you've got all your I's dotted and your T's crossed with regards to some of these hazards. There are ways to make these things safer. You can actually engineer it so that the pumps can be lifted out of the space, so they can work on the pumps and stuff without having to go in. That's something that some folks are working on. Again, just like the water, they're not on sewer, so there are septic tanks all over the place. These are the hatchways here to get into the tanks. There's some round ones, and this one up in here. And again, drowning, toxic gases, low oxygen. You see all these similar kinds of hazards are showing up for these. We didn't go down in these, by the way, in case anybody's asking. So, they say, want to go in? No, we'll pass. We'll just take a picture of the hatch. Boilers. Now, you won't think boiler on a farm, but boilers are very common in greenhouses. So they have wood-fired boilers, they have gas-fired boilers, and in boilers, you don't think, in boilers, the kinds of things that you look at in terms of hazards, even though it's a boiler, water isn't a hazard because the water runs through tubes in the boiler. They don't fill the whole thing up with water and heat it up. It runs through tubes. But you do have to worry about what's in the insulation. So the old boilers could be full of asbestos, and they all have crystalline silica and refractory brick and other insulation. Of course, hot surfaces and welding fumes and whatever else you're going to do there, you have to worry about that. So boilers are there. Crawl spaces. This crawl space is actually a fermentation chamber for mushroom compost. So if somebody tells me a crawl space is safe and it's not a confined space, I would go, well, it depends on what you're using it for. So this was actually a fermentation, not ventilated or anything, and they used it for fermenting stuff. So there you go. Toxic gases, low oxygen, bacteria, mold, and vermin. The ones that survive the low oxygen and toxic gases are, of course. So they're in there. And if you're up, the vermin situation can be pretty serious if you're working in confined spaces in the interior, because the rattlesnakes like to nest in there. And you hear that little rattling sound. And that can be part of your worker training kind of thing. When they hear that, they have to react. It's like the monitor alarm going off, right? Okay, pump shed. Now we look at some unusual ones here. These pump sheds. This is the one where the workers died in the mushroom farm in Langley, and you can see that from the front, it's got a nice big door and everything else. It really doesn't look like much of a confined space, and I think that's what fooled a lot of people. But down below, you see where the arrow is here, is a little tiny walkway, and that's this walkway over here in this other shot. And you can see below that is where all the pumps and pipes and everything are. And in this area where the arrow is actually a little step ladder. So they would get on this plank, and then they would step over this equipment and down the step ladder and crawl underneath the pumps and work their way in amongst that and firmly jam themselves in there. And of course, if there's an emergency and they have to get out, they can't, and they couldn't, and they died. So that's what happens there. So if in the shed, if they'd had the pumps up in someplace that was more easily accessible, they would have had far fewer problems. So here you go again. Toxic gases, low oxygen, bacteria, mold, mechanical equipment, the pumps running, and electrical shock. Being electric. Mobile equipment. Now we found all sorts of things like this on farms. And ones like this, which is a manure tank, and you can see the hatchway right here, whoops, right there. And of course, anybody going in there is going to be exposed to the usual list of hazards. And I don't know whether they go in or not. I mean, this might be some point the farmer might want to say, you know what, we can pay people to go in there that aren't our employees. There are contractors who do this sort of work, and maybe we should get them to do this kind of thing rather than send any of our people in there. Here's another one. This is a feed mixer. This one is a rather large one. They come in different sizes. Some of them there's no way workers could get into, but this one they certainly could. They just go up the ladder there and up, over, and in if they're so inclined. There's a couple of really great big rotating bladed things in there to mix the feed. So it's it's not highly recommended that you go in there. Certainly not until you lock it all out. But that would be considered a confined space, whereas a smaller one may not be, because no workers can get in. It's just too small. Lots of things, mostly mechanical parts is the problem, but if these things have been sitting on the side for a long time, it doesn't take that long for bacteria and fungi to do their thing. And so you've got to be aware of that. If they're not clean for a while, there could be other considerations. Cardboard compactors. Wouldn't you want to go in that? Looks like fun, doesn't it? Get together with a few friends. Anyhow, so you don't know how long the cardboard's been sitting in there, and this is a piece of machinery that you can get into and certainly needs to be locked out. So there's a bunch of stuff, mostly entrapment in the equipment, and mechanical parts would be the major hazards there. But if the cardboard had been sitting there and was moldy and soaking wet, you have other issues that you have to worry about. So it all depends on where they're doing the work. These are all sorts of things that I'd never seen before. This is a soil processor in a greenhouse where they mix soils up. And mix and bag soils, and so this would be the confined space up in here where I'm circling with the arrow, and I guess they go up there. Somebody must go up there. There's a ladder. The evidence is right there. The scene of the crime is. So they go up there, and I guess they dump stuff in, and I don't know whether they go in it or not, but they certainly may. So similar sorts of thing. We'll throw in pesticide residues in there as well, because they often mix pesticides like diazinon and other things in with the soils. So these are other strange things. All right, so I've given you a few examples now of what the hazards are and what the kinds of spaces that you run into in agriculture are. So now what we've got to do is figure out how do we control all of this stuff? What are we going to get the farmers to do to make it safer for people? Well, there are the five. One is you figure out where the confined spaces are. Well, okay, that's obvious. Put warning signs up and figure out what the hazards are, and then educate the workers. Let the workers know. Then the workers can make a decision. So if somebody says to that worker, well, I want you to go down in that sewer and clear that, whatever. They can say, no, that's the confined space. I'm not going to go. No way, I'm not going to go. Whereas before they would have said, oh, sure, without knowing, because that's what happened in the mushroom farm. They all just went where they were told to go. And of course, the last thing they need, once they have this inventory of all their spaces on the farm, is put a column in there that indicates whether or not you even need to go in. A lot of these spaces you never need to go in. There are others that you don't go in. You know, subcontractors come in and clean tanks and do various things like that. They go in, but you don't have to. And there may be a few spaces left at the end where the farmer actually might have to go in. And that's when you have to turn around and develop all of these other programs. So one thing we're getting to do is the inventory. And this is just a list of examples of things that would be listed. Ideally, to give you all the information that you need. You know, what is the confined space? Where is it? Does it have any openings? Obviously it does. How big are they and where are they located? So are they on the top, the bottom, the side? Are they small? Are they large? Are they round? Are they square? What's in the space? Is it milk, water, manure, liquid manure? What is it? What are the hazards? Is there any other equipment in the space? Are there washers or agitators or anything we have to be careful of? What's it used for? Anything else nearby? I'll show you an example for a milk tank. I'll give a few examples of the inventory where there are several confined spaces next to the milk tank. And how is it secured? Are the hatches locked? Or is there a sign that just says do not open? in English, which isn't going to be much help for a lot of agriculture folks because a lot of them don't speak English. Entry required, yes or no. So all that's in the inventory, so they fill that out. And this is one that I threw together. There's 2 or 3 of these working with Neil, and we sort of said, let's give a few examples. So here's an example. This is a milk tank. It's about, as I said, 2 meters in diameter, 10 meters long, and it's in this milk parlor next to the dairy barn. So this is actually a real milk tank in a real farm. I didn't make this up. It's really there. So I went, okay, access egress. There's one hatch, which is up at the top. At one end of the tank, it's about a half a meter in diameter, about 2 feet. You get up to it from a ladder. Contains milk. There are some of the hazards, the cleaning chemicals and stuff like that. There's a clean-in-place spray head system in there, so they can clean the tanks without having to go in. It doesn't mean they never have to go in, but it means you can cut back on how many times you have to. Functional use of the space is milk storage, and what else is in there? Well, right in the back area here, there were at least 2 lift stations below the floor, and they had 2 or 3 big water tanks up on a second level. So they had all sorts of other confined spaces in the area. So you just have to be aware of what's going on there. External surroundings, there's a big storage area, and they have big wide open doors so the driver can get the truck in there to connect the hoses. They do have a sign on it, so right on the ladder there, so that people would know. And the hatchway is secured, but I couldn't tell when I went up there whether they had a key or whatever on it. Is it locked, or just is there a bolt securing it? And if it is locked, who's got the key? Which is something really neat to put in there if you happen to want to get in for some reason. Now, I was told they don't need to get in, and then someone else told me that, occasionally they open the hatch and stick their head in to look around. Well, that's going to be a totally different kind of thing. But I've said entry required, yes, no, and reason. It's not required. The interior cleaning is done by the clean-in-place system, and all the other work is done by an external contractor. So that would be the inventory piece for that particular tank, or that could apply to all the milk tanks, the group of milk tanks. Manure pond. Oh, these are always fun. So here's a big manure pond sitting in the middle of the field. It's about 100 feet by 60 feet, about 6 feet deep, I thought. And just east of the dairy barn, this is the dairy barn over here. This is a nice sort of foggy morning out in the Fraser Valley. Rather nice that day. Pond is at grade. It contains liquid manure and water. So here are the hazards. And again, the hazards come right off the hazard assessments, a lot of which work we've done. There's nothing in there except liquid manure. Nothing around, just a grass field. They got a fence. And no one needs to go in because they just bring a truck in and pump the stuff out. So that's the inventory for that space. So they do that for all the spaces on their property, and then they have to mark them. So we're helping them out in that regard. We have created this confined space sign, one of many different designs of confined space sign that we looked at. And this one sort of won the contest. So this sign tells the workers to keep out, and you put it on there, and I'll show you how they look, how the signage looks. And as I'll repeat later, these signs are going to be printed in 8 languages, including English. So I think there's Korean, Vietnamese, which is what this one is, Spanish, French, some Chinese, 2 different kinds of Chinese, and Punjabi. So, whatever the majority of your workers speak, whatever language that they have, we have a sign for them. So here's where you put the sign. So I've just what I did is I just sort of used my Corel Draw program and just slapped a few signs on. There's one on the feed bin and one on the fence. Isn't that nice? It's a beautiful job, if I do say so myself. And look, this is one of the pump lift stations. You can either put it on top or you can put it beside, as long as it was in the vicinity of the confined space. And the stickers that we have may not stick to that, so we've also got a stencil, but the stencil's only in English. Here's one on top of another lift station. And on the feed mixer, you see, it didn't have one before, now it has one. But that's only virtual reality sign, so they have to go and put a real one on there. And the other thing is on for example, on the septic tank lids, you can put it either on the lid, but I figured that you might not be able to do that, so you could nothing wrong with putting it on a pole beside it. So there's all sorts of ways that you can put signs out now that you have signs. So there's no reason that they shouldn't have the signage there, and people shouldn't be able to find these spaces wherever they are. So how do you make them safer? One, barriers and signage we talked about. Moving equipment outside the space is a great idea. If you can drag it out and fix it and push it back in, you don't have to go in there. And there are ways to do that. The clean-in-place systems for cleaning we've talked about. I'll show you a picture of a engineered system that's designed to break up bridges and bins so the workers don't have to go in and dance on top of on the bridges, which is not a great idea. Make openings bigger and bring them down from high places where people can't get at them down to the bottom. And that may not be practicable in all cases because a lot of these bins and stuff are engineered. When you fill them up, there's an awful lot of pressure, right, from the material in there. And you want to cut a hole in that. Well, you might have some people going, well, ugh. But there are ways and means. Installing ramps or movable stairways into vaults and pits is something that's been done recently as well. And the bottom line thing that you can do to make them safer is not go in at all and just contract the work out. And then worry about that contractor. Make sure that contractor knows what they're doing. So how to get people to not do this? You can, even though you have a hatch. In these tanks, for example, there's a hatch on the top and the bottom. And to stop people from going in the top, you simply weld some bars across there and they can't go in, but there's still access to the hatch. If you want to air out the thing, you can open the bottom and the top hatches and still get some air movement. But nobody can go in there unless, again, they're a real skinny kind of person. Not too many are going to do that. This is the only bad quality picture I have, but what it shows is an agitator. This is a manure pit. So this cement slab is on top of the pit. And this is the agitator, and this is one of the blades, like a fan blade, and this is the takeoff for a hydraulic system that turns the thing over. And this can just be pulled right out of the pit and pushed right back in when the repairs are made. So there's no need to actually go down in there now, which is a really good thing. I don't know whether you've ever been in a manure pit. I mean, I haven't. I'm not looking forward to the experience. Milk tanks, we talked about. I keep coming back to milk tanks because it's a good example. Clean in place systems and automated washing systems, and they can be in all of these tanks. There's no reason not to install them and save on the time and the number of times people need to go in. This is one of the augers, this in-place auger system. So this is these are feed bins. And if these things get clogged, the only way to break the bridge is to go up the ladder and in the top hatch and dance up and down on the grain, which is not a good thing. So I figured that somebody's got to figure out a way around this. And you go on the internet and you search for, engineered augers for grain bins or whatever, and you get the same picture every time, which is this one. Every company is using it, and essentially what they do is they just run it up. I guess it's a post-engineered system. They run it up through there. It's an auger that turns, and they just pump right up through and free the thing up, and down it comes, and nobody needs to go in and dance on it. Not a bad idea. Here's one from a water treatment plant, not agriculture, but similar kinds of thing could be used. They have, in the water treatment plant, they have all these cement ponds that are quite deep. And before, when they put workers in, they'd either put a ladder down or to crawl down the ladder, or else lower them in a harness. But now they've installed all these removable stairways. So the stairway like this one here, see, pointing at the screen does no good. You have to use the mouse. So down here, they can go up and down. They've got the access, and they can get access and egress and rescue and everything can get down there. So essentially, that takes this out of Part 9. With some of the more onerous requirements in Part 9 that they don't have to worry about. Here's our pump shed again. Now, what can you do to make something like this safer? One is you can move your pumps to the outside so that workers can get at them without having to go crawl underneath everything. Installing ventilation fans and checking for toxic gases is something that's being done now in all of the mine properties, certainly in BC and I think across Canada. So in 2008, the mushroom workers died. In 2006, the 4 people died in Sullivan Mine in a pump shed. So what they did as a consequence of that is if you are going into a shed that has water flowing through it and entering it from a mine, because water flowing through minerals and stuff like that can have the oxygen leached out of it, then they have a policy that before they go in the shed, the workers, they turn the ventilation system on and they leave it for a certain period of time. And then when they open the door, they have an oxygen meter, and they measure the oxygen concentration in there before they go in. And so if you're going up to look at the reclamation project up in Britannia Mine, they've got a bunch of sheds on there that are generator sheds run from the water coming down from the mine. And you'll see these guys turn the ventilation on and check their monitors before they even go into the shed. So this was a real lesson. That was a lesson for everybody. And it's the same sort of thing here. You could make these things safer. Now, this situation, this is a compost truck that transports mushroom compost. And what happens is they've got a loader in a huge building that takes the compost from the fermentation, whatever tanks and where they're storing it, and pumps it off into the top of the truck. You know, it's like a conveyor, drops it off into the top of the truck. And the truck goes where it needs to go. And it has a conveyor at the very back here that drops it onto another conveyor, which goes up here and back into the mushroom farm. And there's a walking floor in the bottom of these things. So what a walking floor is, it just sort of moves back and forth like this, and it's hydraulic, and it shovels the material from one end of the thing to the other. So you know, these workers, a couple of workers had gotten ill, lung diseases amongst other things, from that were the drivers. So we figured, well, how can this possibly happen to drivers? This doesn't make any sense. You go in the trucks. And the employer says, oh, no, they don't go in the trucks. And there's a big language barrier. I mean, I was talking to these guys, and it was just like, you go in the trucks. But he said, oh, yes. And I said, okay, you show me. So I went up the ladder here and looked down into the truck, and I saw this. Rungs going down, a shovel, and a broom. So, okay, someone's not telling me the truth. These guys really must go in there, and that sort of clinched it in terms of the exposure. So, so this is looking back down the bed of the truck right here, so you can see all the residual composting. So there's a couple of ways you can get around it without workers having to go there. One is you can have some sort of a wash system to push the stuff down to the end if the walking floor isn't getting the residual. And the other is a pole-mounted pusher of some kind, so the workers could just push the stuff down without having to actually get down into the truck. So all of these, everything is controllable, right? So what did we do and what do we have? Right now, what we're calling our Confined Space Center for Excellence for Agriculture at this point is more hardware rather than software. So we've got printed materials, we've got signage. Well, the software could be the training courses, and we've even got a website. And the printed materials are 8 employer books, and we've divided it up, and I'll show you what the covers look like. These will all be coming out at the beginning of May, and they're divided up into, I think, well, we'll go over them when I show you the pictures, but there are 8 of them, and there's one worker book which sort of covers all aspects of agriculture, which is shorter because the workers don't need to know a lot of stuff like inventory. That's in 8 languages. The sticker, as I mentioned, is in 8 languages, and we have a stencil which is in English, so they'll be able to paint on a sign on things that are a little bit more difficult to get things to stick to and stuff outdoors. They had a plastic sign. I went in one dairy farm, and I was walking on this thing that, you know, was kind of mushy, and they had a hatchway that had this, and it was the sign on it. The sign was eaten away, and it was the hatchway to the manure pit underneath. So I guess some of this manure can eat Confined Space sign. So training courses, we got a worker training course we're working on, an employer training course, some of which you've already seen. It's the kind of materials. And our officers are also going to be trained in this stuff. So, and all the training materials other than the officer stuff will be online, either in PDF or PowerPoint format as part of the website, as will the printed materials. They'll be as PDFs so you can get at them, and the signage as well. And all of this is going to be on an interactive website, and you'll be able to get access to the photographs. You'll be able to get access to all of the stuff that's on there. And we may move forward with stuff like that. There's even some talk of developing some apps for Android and iOS to do things like geolocate confined spaces on a big farm, which a lot of the farmers are kind of excited about, which is surprising because I didn't think they were very high tech until I ran into this thing called a selfie. I don't know whether people heard of, you heard of selfies, right? You take pictures of yourself with your cell phone. Oh yeah, everybody's laughing. Yeah, I know you do. Selfies are farmers taking pictures of themselves with their cell phone. And they take pictures of themselves and their farms, and themselves and their animals, and themselves and their farming equipment. And if you go up and look up selfie on Google, look up, don't do it now. You'll find all these pictures of farmers with their cows and stuff like that, and it's really kind of fun. So they are more tech-savvy than I thought. So let's go and take a look at some of these things. So we have, now these publications, and here are 3 of them: dairy farms, grain and seed farms, berry and vegetable farms, orchards and vineyards, mushroom farm composting, greenhouses, nurseries, and floriculture, and finally, poultry and egg farms, ranches, animal farms, and feedlots, and of course our worker book. Now all of these, the way these things work is they have some sections that are common to the books. For example, here's a table of contents. So Part A, confined spaces and hazards, what they are and why they're a concern, that's common to all the books. And preparing to work in confined spaces, which is what the farmers have to do if they decide that they want to go in, is common to all the books. The biggest chunk is B, which is managing confined spaces. And in here, we have photographed all the confined spaces. And we put the hazard assessments, or a brief hazard assessment, in there as well for all of the spaces in all of these different sections of agriculture. So we have got hundreds of images that are in the books in color. And this is, as far as I know, the first time that's ever been done for any kind of confined space lab. So it's going to be a really good reference. And my only worry about this is, after all this hard work, somebody's going to come and tap me on the shoulder and say, you know, we got confined spaces in manufacturing and in construction and in oil and gas. Yeah. You know, you love making sure that people are going to employ you for a long period of time, but anyhow, so for example, feed bins. We've seen feed bins before. This is a section of the feed bins from the book, and it's got a nice big picture of a typical feed bin, and it describes what they are and what the hazards are, and some of the hazardous work, like breaking up the bridge material, which I've talked about, that they do. So the photograph is there. You can actually see what it looks like. Bunkers. I threw that in there for a purpose because a lot of folks would say, well, a bunker's not a confined space. It's got a huge dirty grate opening here. Why is that a confined space? Well, it is if you put this stuff in the wrong way and you built up a big barrier of material at the front, and workers got to climb over that to get inside to do what they need to do. And they could get into a confined area back there. So you could, if you are administering bunkers and loading from the back to the front, for example, and making sure that you're not creating your own confined spaces in there, you might not have to put bunkers under, unless they're below ground, put them under Part 9. So this is what the bunkers are. They're held, damp feed stored in the bunker, so on and so forth. You can read the books. You don't have to read this stuff. And all the hazards that are listed and the hazardous work that is accompanying that. And I think I got one more example here. Milk tanks. Gee, why does that keep popping up? So here's the section on milk tanks. Some of them have wheels, as it turns out. And all of the hazards apply to both. They're stainless steel cylinders. They're normally hazardous gases aren't a problem, but it's the cleaning chemicals that you put in and the risk of connection, or at least or impact with the mechanical equipment in there that does that. So every single confined space or group of confined spaces that we were able to identify, and there are lots of them. And as you go through the books, you'll just scratch your head and go, oh, never thought of that one. We had lots of head-scratching moments, like the weigh scale in the ranch, the weighing pit in the ranch. As Neil told me, he was walking around and he stopped one place for a moment, and suddenly it started to vibrate underneath him, and he was standing on the scale. And there was hay and everything all over it, so he didn't realize what he was standing on. When he asked, he said, oh, yeah, that's the weighing platform. Is there anything underneath it? Oh, yeah, you get it from a hatchway over here. Oops, there's another confined space we didn't know about. So, if all else fails, and they have to go in, then they have to put together a confined space entry program and have confined space entry procedures, including all our favorites: lockout and isolation air testing, ventilation plan, assigning standby people, and rescue program and permits and all of that. They have to go through that whole process. But if they inventory all their spaces first and they figure out which ones they need to go in and which ones they don't need to go in, they're going to cut back on a lot of the work that they have to do. And when they get into this, you get to a stage where it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to do that by yourself. You're going to have to go to a qualified person. And the qualified person is defined in the regulation as these guys and also in guidelines. So, when you run out of CIHs and ROHs and CSPs and CRSPs and professional engineers, sorry, Ed, you're down toward the bottom of the list there, but I think you are a hygienist too, aren't you? Yes. For those of you who can't see Ed Chesser is here, and I haven't seen him in a while, but he still looks good. And now this last one down here, others who have experience working with confined spaces, there are other people who work on some of these sites, and I'm thinking shipyards, for example, who have a lot of knowledge of confined spaces on their sites. They're very knowledgeable. They may not have these letters beside their names, and they may not put it down in print. Unfortunately, they have it all in their heads. But if they were able to put it down in print, they would pretty well cover everything. And when our officers are out looking for, we'll look at the designations of people, but when we look at the program, we're looking at what does the program say. And if the person has got it right, and obviously they're qualified, whether they have a degree or not. And we run into that on occasion, but not very often, I'll tell you. The problem with the qualified person, and there are students in here who are looking to learn and who want to get out there and make money eventually, so listen very carefully. There aren't too many of these people around. So if you're thinking of something you might want to do, there will always be a place for more qualified people who can do confined space work, because we don't have a lot of them in the province right now, and that's a problem. but it's one we're working on, and hopefully getting information like we're getting out today will help get the word out that what kinds of things need to be done, and how do you keep these people from going in to these spaces when they're not supposed to be going into these spaces. We do what we can. Anyhow, I think that's it. All that's left is the manhole. We said 45 minutes. I think I'm bang on. Very welcome. So, questions?
Questions.
Questions? Oh, Ed. Okay. Oh, he's very eager.
I missed the wineries in this. How did they get left out of this program or this set of agricultural workplaces?
Technically, they're manufacturing. The wineries have been moved under manufacturing, so they're with FIOSA MIOSA, which is the food and beverage safety and health folks. But you do bring up a good point, because vineyards have wineries, right? So we're talking about vineyards. It's one of the things we had to think about. Do we want to include wineries and vineyards? No, because wineries is included in manufacturing, and then you start stepping on other people's toes. So we will get to them eventually, but we thought that we would, in terms of the agricultural classification units, we'd stick with what's in our thing like that. So no, that's true. Anybody else? I can't just be Lydia and Ed. Come on, you students must have some questions.
I have to ask a question of Jeff, of course. Thanks. You talked about an industry that has a lot of well, not a lot, but temporary workers. So that question popped into my mind. And one of the slides early on, you said that these are the things that you do to make the workplace safer against confined space hazards. And education wasn't in there, worker training, but later on you did have a slide to show that. So what sort of requirements has WorkSafe put in place to put the owners on the employer to ensure that it's effective training that workers get beyond the signage that's posted? It just takes one person to look at a signage and doesn't get it, and then incur the catastrophic incident.
This is all part and parcel. What's going to be happening is, first, the regulation is already there to educate. So what we're looking at is ways to, one, make them realize, the employers realize their obligations, and make sure that they have the materials available to help them do what they need to do. So during the employer education sessions, it's going to be emphasized to them that the workers, even their temporary workers, have to be educated in this particular issue with the confined spaces. And the worker book we've got is going to be translated into 8 languages. So the workers will get a book in as close to their own language as we can get. Now, there still is one snag with that, is that a lot of the seasonal workers who come in from some of the other countries are not literate in their own language. So we get a lot of Mexican workers who can't read Spanish. And if you do it that way, then you're going to have to show them. And we're hoping the stop sign is a pretty universal symbol, I think, through a lot of cultures, so that we've been able to determine. So they're going to have to be shown. And if they can't be shown, if they can't read their own language, then they get somebody who can read the language who's going to have to show them. And the information is also going to be available on the web. So if they have access to any kind of computer, which is interesting when they come in, if they can't read their own language, what are they doing with a computer? But there will be a way to get this information to all of these seasonal workers who come in, at least with regard to confined spaces. The other thing we're emphasizing in the worker training section is an emphasis on what the workers' rights are. Workers' rights to know and workers' rights to refuse. And that's being drummed into the employer, and it's being drummed into the workers as well, because that seems to have sort of skidded sideways a bit with some of the agricultural employers. So you're right, and we got it. We think we got it. And Karen, all the faculty people are great answering questions. No, you gotta wait. You gotta wait till you're there. I'm going to start asking the students questions. So I'm going to start.
Good plan. So you've got the temporary workers, but in the last few, well, in many cases, it's the first responders that have also succumbed to the toxic atmospheres in the confined spaces. So what's the next step on that?
All the first responders, I know certainly the BC ambulance people received a lot of training, and the fire departments have received a lot of training, particularly since the Sullivan Mine incidents in '06. And in fact, what happened at the mushroom farm in '08 was that when the ambulance arrived, they refused to go in to the shed, and they actually held back the mushroom farm employees who were still trying to get in there, even though there were dead workers in there by that time. So they learned their lesson from the Sullivan Mine in '06. And hopefully that will carry on. So they know. We'll find out. Well, we won't find out because there's not going to be anything else like this happening ever again, is there? No. No, absolutely not.
I'm curious about, I live out in the valley. I deal with farmers on a day-to-day basis. I'm curious about the buy-in from employers. How easy is this stuff to sell? How do you get these messages through?
Well, when I went out there and talked to some of the farmers, when I went out to some of these sites, I just found them incredibly gracious. They were more than willing to take us around, more than willing to answer questions and show us things that I've never seen in a farm. I went and saw a poultry farm. I saw them raising the little chickens. I didn't think of what was going to happen to the little chickens. I just watched them raising them and the cows and all that other stuff. There's stuff I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and many of which has changed over the years. But I found them to be, all the farmers that we went out to talk to were very, very interested in this. A lot of them already had confined spaces marked and the signs marked, had their own signs, and they were looking for some consistency throughout the province. And of course, FARSHA plays a big part in this in terms of the cell, the Farm and Ranch Safety and Health Association. So they are involved in this. They will probably be delivering the education piece. We won't be delivering that, they will be. So, and they're hand in hand with the farmers. They know them, they know the employers, they're in a good working relationship with them. So I think it'll work out really well. Quick. Somebody wants to ask a question?
I was just wondering if you know what the other provinces across Canada have been doing in this respect. Is there any move to integrate it for like signage? Because is FARSHA, that's the National Farming Association?
The FARSHA is what?
Is that's like for the whole of Canada?
No, FARSHA is just BC.
Oh, okay.
So they're actually what's the word I'm looking for? Subsidized by WorkSafe. So from assessment. So they're a BC organization, and nobody else that I know of in all the other jurisdictions is doing anything like this. This is when we sat down to figure out. You have a coroner's inquest jury say to you, we want you to figure out how you can do this. And then you have to sit down and figure out, okay, what have we done before? Has it been effective? Obviously not that effective because people continue to die in these spaces. So what's the best way to get the word out? So I figured, let's try something a bit different. Let's concentrate on awareness and training and getting workers and understanding. And everybody seemed to vibrate with that. All right, so FARSHA was on board with that, and the farm employers said, yeah, we'd really appreciate more education, something we can tell our workers, so our workers will understand, rather than talking to them about ventilation plans and all this other stuff. So we decided to move in that direction. We'll have to wait and see how it works out. I'm hopeful that it'll work out well, that people will resonate with it, and then maybe it'll move into other industries.
Got a question here online. It says, thanks, Jeff. Great info. I'm wondering if you could please elaborate on how the manure pond is considered enclosed, one of the 4 criteria. Thanks.
Manure ponds would be enclosed once they're empty. So when they're full, obviously no one's going to go into it. But when you empty them, they can be anywhere from a couple of feet to 6 feet or 8 feet deep in the middle. And you're walking in there. You're enclosed on the 4 sides, and if you're going down, there's no ramp or stairway or anything else, no easy access. You're climbing down into it. If there was a problem, how are people going to get to you, and how are they going to get you out? And that's why it ends up in Part 9. But you can get it out of Part 9 just as easily by, like I said, building a ramp would take it out of Part 9. But someone in the back here, one of the students, I think, had a question, and then Ed.
Another comment from the online, just a comment from the online audience saying, just to confirm, the BC ambulance paramedics are not allowed to do rescue, therefore they are not allowed to go into confined spaces.
No. Yeah, so they've been trained not to go in. They will stop people from going in.
Great talk. So
Yeah, you're on.
Super. So I grew up on a maple sugar bush in Ontario, so quite different. I don't know where that would fit as far as manufacturing or farm if it were categorized in BC. And when I watch your presentation, I think about all the small family farms, whether they would fall under this sort of program and what you have found as far as a difference in reception where the workers and the employer are actually just all family farming together. If there's a difference in response there from compared to the larger operations.
Yeah, very good question, because that did come up. And if the farm is registered in British Columbia, they can register with WorkSafe, or if they're a limited company, then they're automatically under WorkSafe. So they do have to follow our regulation. But you're quite correct that if there's very few of them, I mean, what we discovered was oftentimes if there are 2 or 3 people operating the farm, then, and they have to do a confined space entry, then, okay, so who's going to do the rescue? Who's going to be the standby person? Who's going to go in and do the work? It becomes much more complicated. So in those cases, I'd rather try and convince them to find another way of getting the work done without their people having to go in there. And if they are going to have to go in there, they're going to have to follow the same program everybody else. And we're willing to give them all the help that we can give them. And Farsha has done a lot of work already toward putting things together for these kinds of small farmers. But yeah, we're aware of the difficulty with the smaller operations. Absolutely. And I don't know how that would qualify. I mean, the trees are already there. If you plant them, then it's a farm. It would probably fall under orchards if it was in BC, the maple sugar orchard.
So just I want to clarify the jurisdiction question. In my distant past experience, a family farm was not required to register under WorkSafe. So a WorkSafe officer would have no jurisdiction because there's nobody other than family there.
Yeah, I don't know how it works under since 2005, since we got the reg. That's I haven't asked those kinds of questions, but I mean certainly we're considering them. But I do know that if it's a limited company of some type, then they have to register. Now there may be some out there that aren't, and you're right. I mean a WorkSafe officer, okay, fine, we don't have jurisdiction there, but that doesn't mean that we can't get our materials into their hands from Farsha and get the information to them. And I don't know, when I talk to all of these farmers, you know what, they really do care about their people. I just can't see any of them thinking, well, I'm not going to tell them that, let them go in the tank. You know, I got 5 more coming up next week. They don't do things like that. They really are concerned about the people that they hire, especially the smaller ones, for example, the smaller ones. Everybody's either family or they all know one another. And I know some of the other ones, we've got a lot of workers coming in from out of the province. I mean, a lot coming in from Mexico every year. To do the fruit picking, a lot coming in from Quebec in the past have come in to do that, and you know, all of those people are still have to be protected as well. So.
I'm just going to go back to my question and point out that what I was really concerned about with farmers and what I know of farmers is that they are very versatile folks, and I was concerned about the employers themselves taking on the responsibility of entering confined spaces themselves rather than having their workers do it. Yes,
they do. They do that, but even employers I think they are considered workers. Now we're getting into areas of WorkSafe that you're getting into administrative and technical stuff that I rely on other people to deal with. But if you are being paid by the farm, and even an employer would be, then you could be considered a worker and employer at the same time. And if you are, then you have to obey the same rules as everybody else, and comply with what the regulatory requirements are. And we're trying to make it easier for people to do the inventory and stuff like that by giving them a lot of information. And we'll just have to, like I said, we have to wait and see where this all goes. So the big launch is sometime in May. I'm not sure the exact date. They're gearing up for it. So you'll probably hear about it on the news and stuff like that. That'd be kind of fun. And then we just wait and see. Okay?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. That was very informative, Jeff, and thank you everybody for another great year of occupational environmental health seminars, and we'll see you in September. Also, just want to remind everyone, especially the online audience, that you can sign up to subscribe to our weekly emails so that you know what the seminars are going to be and you can make space in your calendars for them. We'll see you next year.